This over here is the MSI Prestige 16 laptop, and it's running the brand new Core Ultra 285H CPU. And this roughly costs around $1,200, $1,300. This has 1 terabyte of SSD and 32 gigabytes of RAM. This over here is the MSI Prestige 16, and this is running the AMD Ryzen 9 AI 365. And guess what? It also costs roughly around $1,200. Finally, we have apples to apples comparison, and we can find out which is better, Intel or AMD. Talking about apples to apples comparison, this over here is the Apple MacBook Air 15-inch. This has got the M3 chip, and this also costs about the same. Bear in mind, the specs are half the size of SSD and half the capacity of RAM. That being said, which one is the best and which one should you be actually getting? Did Intel and AMD finally beat the Apple? Let's find out. It's so annoying. I don't want to pay hundreds of dollars to just change my Windows wallpaper just because my Windows isn't licensed. Well, why don't you try Hookies? That's a ton cheaper, and if you use the code TN20, you get it even cheaper. What do you mean? How do I get it and how is it possible? Well, see this video here, or the one you're watching. Click in the link on the video description, add the Windows 11 CD product to the cart, proceed to checkout, add the code TN20 for the extra discount. So what, the Windows 11 Pro OEM key is just $23.22? Yeah. Choose the preferred payment option and complete the purchase. The key will be available on the purchased orders in a few moments. Copy the key and paste it into your Windows activation settings, and you're all done. Well, that was easy. Is that Ryan Gosling? No. Anyway, by the way, the same discount code also works website-wide, so go check out other products, maybe like Microsoft Office. So let's jump straight into the benchmarks. Which performance is better? Starting with the CPU performance and Cinebench R24. Firstly, what you're going to see here is single multi-core score, multi-core for 10 minutes, multi-core for 30 minutes. They are all done when the laptop is plugged in. And then finally on battery, we have the single and multi. What this shows us here, and why we want to know this, is that on a smaller, light kind of laptops, sometimes the laptops throttle. So when you run the test on a multi-core once, you might get a higher score, but then when it heats up, it has to throttle itself because the chassis is small, and then you get a smaller or lower performance. When you work on some of your workflow or you work on something, your laptop performance actually goes down. So now we can see what happens after 10 minutes and 30 minutes. So looking at the Intel versus Ryzen here, the AMD Ryzen in single core score is about 15.6% slower than the Core Ultra 9 and about 20% slower in the multi-core score when plugged in. After 10 minutes, you can see that interestingly, Intel is losing a little bit of performance, but for some reason, AMD is gaining some performance in 10 minutes. Now, how is this possible? It could be because the first run actually throttles the thermal limit, and then the fans take time to kick in to cool it down to a level where it's not thermally throttling. But in 10 minutes, the average of the 10 runs or 10 minutes of runs lifts the actual score up, whereas on the Intel, it's the other way around. After it's like kicked in and we started to lose the boost, because it can probably boost only like certain amount of the high power and then drops down to the lower power, we're losing the performance in 10 minutes. And if we look at the 30 minutes, you can see that we've lost even more on Intel. We're still better than AMD, but we're quite a bit slower now compared to just the single core score. AMD now is only about 5.2% slower. Unplugging those laptops, we can see now that AMD really loses quite a bit on just battery power, 22% slower compared to Intel. Looking at Intel's single plugged in or unplugged, we're seeing basically the same score. Moving on to multi-core score, you can see that also Intel is slightly slower when you unplug the laptop, but still on battery, very, very similar to what we saw when it was charging. Now on AMD, interestingly, when you're on battery, you get quite a bit higher score. So I'm not sure if the charging was heating up the laptop or what was going on in there, but when running the test on battery, we're getting a higher score than when we were plugged in. And we're about 8 or 9% slower compared to the Intel Core Ultra. There is the third guy in this race, which is the Apple MacBook Air M3. Single core score on the MacBook is 30% faster. That's insane leap. In terms of multi-core score, we're about 13-14% slower in the multi-core score. After 10 minutes, we're 20% slower than Intel and about 20% slower in the 30 minutes as well. In terms of 10 to 30 minutes, because this MacBook Air is actually passively cooled, meaning there's no fans, you'll never hear the laptop. It's always completely quiet. It just saturates its heat after a couple of minutes, and then it's going to lower the performance a little bit. And you can see that 7% roughly difference between single run and then the 10-minute score runs. When unplugging the laptop, there is literally no difference whether we're on battery or non-battery. You can see a little bit of a score difference there between the multi-core score plugged in and unplugged, but really there is no difference there. So MacBook here really in single core is quite a bit better, but in multi-core loses quite a bit to Intel. As you can see on battery, we're 32% slower. That's ridiculous. But that's not all, is it? Let's take a look at Geekbench 6, see if that is any different. Here we can see that the AMD Ryzen is about 5% slower in the single core score and about the same in multi-core score. So here suddenly the multi-core score is very much equal between AMD and Intel. Interestingly, the MacBook Air here is only now 6.5% faster in the single core score, not 30% like we saw it in Cinebench, about 14% slower in the multi-core score. So similar kind of trend, but the difference isn't as big as what we saw on the previous one. Let's test the GPU. All of these laptops don't have a dedicated GPU. Whatever the GPU is on the CPU, so the integrated graphics, SoC, because they're all SoC, you've got your RAM and everything's on the chip. You can't actually change any of the RAM. You can see that the Ryzen is about 25% faster in the Vulkan score compared to the Core Ultra 9 and about 18% faster in the OpenCL score in terms of GPU. When we look at the MacBook, slightly slower than the Ryzen AI 9 in the OpenCL. In the Vulkan or Metal score, it is about 57% faster than Core Ultra 9. But bear in mind, the Vulkan Metal can't be exactly compared. Here's a test we can get from Geekbench 6. Now, everyone's talking about AI, and in fact, the Ryzen AI is in the name, Ryzen AI 9, and then Intel, there's AI laptop as well. So what does the AI mean? Let's take a look how good it is on AI and which one of these is best at the AI application then. By the way, if you want to pick any of these up, go check out the links in the video description below. If you want to buy this MacBook, don't buy it from Apple's website, because through the links below, you can actually get it cheaper. Don't believe me? Go check it out. And if you stick till the end of the video, you see there's a little bit of bad news about the Apple, or good news. You'll find out. In AI, and when we're utilizing the CPU, let's take a look at the difference here. In terms of AI CPU, in the single, the Ryzen is 53% faster than the Core Ultra 9. In the multi, we are 107, literally more than double the performance than Intel on the Ryzen. In terms of quantized, it's 78% faster than the Core Ultra 9. That is ridiculous improvement over Core Ultra 9. The MacBook Air is about 34% faster than the Core Ultra 9, over 3 times faster in multi, and about 13% slower in the quantized scores. So in terms of CPU and AI, the AMD Ryzen is the winner here, MacBook second, and Intel third. What about the GPU? Interestingly, the Ryzen AI is about 10% slower in the single, 30% slower in the multi, and 73% slower in the quantized score. So here Intel gets a massive win in the GPU side, even the win over the MacBook Air. The M3 is 13% slower in the single, 41% slower in the multi, and 62% slower in the quantized. So I would say first is Intel, then AMD Ryzen with a mix of the MacBook Air, and then comes the Apple with their M3 in terms of GPU performance. Here's the thing, all of these laptops also have an NPU, or neural engine as Apple likes to call it. So let's take a look at the test in there. Interestingly, AMD Ryzen AI, maybe because of the driver or whatever issues, it can't actually utilize that benchmark. It doesn't see that the NPU is there. So there's a software issue there. MacBook Air is, oh my goodness, absolutely whooping this Intel here. 300% faster in the multi, so that's over 3 times faster, almost 3 times faster. Quantized is 202% faster than the old Core Ultra 9. So Apple gets a massive win in here in terms of the neural engine compared to Intel or AMD. But here's the thing, what about power draw? If we open up all of these laptops and start running Cinebench, I want to know how much power did we actually use to generate all of these scores. So just want to mention that my MacBook Air, I've done a little bit DIY cooling for this passive cooling. If you want to see what I've done, go check out the video on the channel. But basically, I've made sure that it's got a little bit better cooling than what it comes out of the factory with. We're all on Cinebench R24 in all of these laptops, and I'm gonna press play on all of the multi-core tests, and then let's take a look what happens here firstly. So on Intel side, we can see that the total system power here, about 54, 55 watts. Let's make sure that our power plan here is also, yep, best performance. We're pulling about 54 watts. On Apple here, what we can see that our package power draw here is roughly around 20 watts. It goes to about 20 and then goes a little bit down. And as you can see, we've already thermal throttled here, kind of. We're roughly about 20 watts in here. And looking at the Ryzen, let's make sure that we are also on the best power mode. Best performance indeed. Let's take a look. We can see that the CPU package power draw, interestingly, again, over 51 watts and then went down to 42 watts. Intel is pushing a little bit more here, 56 watts. Apple literally less than half of the wattage here, about 43 now on AMD. In terms of temperatures, we're running here about 100 degrees on the MacBook Air. On Intel, we're running at 75 degrees, 76 degrees. And on AMD, we're running roughly about the same, 76, 77 degrees. Interestingly, AMD seems to be running actually hotter than on Intel, even though it's pulling less wattage, but it's running hotter. And this Intel laptop seems to be quieter than the AMD one as well. The AMD one is quite loud in there. 77 degrees, roughly about the same on Intel, but we're pulling 57 watts. There's extra 10, 13 watts on Intel, but we're actually cooler. So you might be saying, yeah, it's cool that you're talking about the watts, but why is this important? Well, it's important to see actually how much power did we draw when getting those CPU results. If you remember, Intel was the best one, then was AMD, and then Apple. If you're using a lot of power to get those scores, what happens is your battery is going to run out or run emptier a lot faster than if you were pulling less power. So because it's a laptop, I believe that there's a really fine line of tuning how much power you give it and then how good it is on battery life, which is what we're going to test now. All of these laptops I'm going to put to do a DaVinci Resolve export test, exactly the same project, to exactly the same format, to really see in a real world, in a creative workflow, exporting these, what results can we expect? We're gonna have all of the batteries 100%, and then after the export, we'll see how much is left, and if they even finished it. Let's do it. The render test is now complete, and guess which one won? Obviously, Apple won here, and we have 7 minutes 26 seconds. Second, which finished, was Intel with this laptop, and that was 10 minutes and 44 seconds. Exactly the same project, by the way. And finally, we have AMD over here with 20 minutes and 22 seconds. But that's not all. Obviously, Apple got a massive win, Intel second, AMD third. But when we look at the battery left here, Apple has 96% battery left. Intel has 89% battery left, as you can see over there. Coming here to AMD, 79% battery left. As you can see, the MacBook is incredibly efficient. One of the things I noticed is that the AMD laptop fans are kicking up so high and so fast, which actually wastes the battery power. Right, there's no fans in here. It doesn't have to use the fans. Look at that, we exported it out, only 4% of battery left. Here, 11, and there, 22% battery gone. So, what can we say then? Are we concluding that Apple is the best performer? Intel second and AMD third. Is that what we're saying then? Is that the whole story? No. There's another very important factor why people don't buy Apple laptops, but Windows, which means we're gonna have to turn these the other way around. That was a job and a half. So when looking inside the chassis, you already see some of the things, which is M.2 SSDs, which means you can upgrade them, you can update them. On Intel side, the good thing is there is a secondary M.2 slot in here. Now this is an engineering sample, what I have in here, but I don't see why they should remove that, but there is a secondary SSD in there. On the AMD side, we don't. We see pretty similar cooling system, except on Intel side, it's a little bit of a better or more efficient, or seems like it. You've got two heat sinks that go around with one fan blowing this way, whereas on AMD, you've got two fans intaking from the bottom and exhausting out from the back. On the AMD side though, the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth card is actually removable. You can just insert that in there. Whereas on the Intel side, it is plugged in over there or soldered onto the chip. The Intel machine has 100 watt-hour battery, whereas on the AMD, there is only 80.2 watt-hour battery. So that could be part of the reason why Intel's getting better battery life, because there's just more capacity. Have we covered all the reasons now finally why you would want to buy one of these laptops instead of the MacBook? There is one more thing, which is the most important one. And the most important thing for me is the usability and design. Now, I've got to give some credit to MSI. They're moving the right direction. This seems absolutely amazing finish. Now, the Intel one seems actually a little bit more flimsy and kind of a cheaper made than the other MSI. The light silver one seems better materials, feels a little bit stronger. Everything just seems better built. In terms of ports though, Intel is the best one over here. We've got a full-size SD card slot, mic and headphone combo jack. You've got Ethernet port in there, two Thunderbolt 4 ports in the back, HDMI, and then USB Type A. You've got two USB Type-C, which are USB 4 on the AMD, and then an HDMI Type A micro SD card slot, headphone and mic combo jack. Now it's nice to have the SD card slots, but on the MacBook, we basically have just two Thunderbolt 4 ports and one headphone and mic combo jack. Let's talk about the usability. Have you actually listened to the speakers, used the webcam, tried the trackpad or touchpad compared to the Apple one? I'm sorry, but there is no comparison. That's MacBook Air. The MSI just sounds like it's broken. Check 1, 2. This is what the MSI webcam looks like and sounds like. Interestingly, there's another camera on the side here that I have no idea what it does, okay? It's not the IR sensors or anything. There's just a camera on the side. I don't know what that is for. The same on the actual AMD model. There's extra cameras on the side. I don't know what they do. And this is the MacBook Air M3. This is what it sounds like. Let me know which looks better. So MacBook Air, MSI, which one sounds and looks better? In terms of any other usability features, that makes me actually really angry about some of these Windows laptop providers, because for some reason they cannot make the most important thing work, which is the usability. The trackpad and the keyboard, they're nowhere near what Apple provides here. I can take a MacBook Air 5 years ago, this guy over here, the M1, the trackpad and keyboard, they still work so much better on this than on this brand new one from MSI. This is like half the price, if not even less. Now, we've established that in terms of CPU performance, yes, Intel is better than even Apple and AMD, but the other package around that performance and power really is insignificant, which kind of leaves it a bit of a which is really, really annoying, because I personally prefer Windows operating system than Mac OS. I feel like I'm faster in there. I think certain things are a little bit more logical. I like how Windows works and snapping, my preference, okay? But just because it's so nice to work with the Apple hardware, you're gonna fall in love with the Apple thing. And here's the biggest caveat in here now. At the time of me making this, few days later, the M4 MacBook Airs are arriving, which makes the performance of the M4 even better than what we have on this side. And things are kind of changing again, because now we get a cheaper MacBook Air because it's $100 cheaper. By the way, if you go check it out through the links below, you probably get it even more cheaper. It's just a little bit crazy. I'm not sure about you, what you would do, but as much as the performance is impressive, the other things kind of leave it a bit of a But hey, that's just my opinion, okay? I would love to know yours in the comment section below. Let me know what you think. I'll see you down there. And in the description, you can find some other things that are helpful. If you're interested in seeing the M4 MacBook Airs, stick around because I bought every single color. I'll see you soon. Bye.